She set the table for 3. I thought it was just dinner, until I realized I was the guest in my own apartment. He said I'd been passive-aggressive lately. She said I owed him an apology. So I sat there, fork in hand, listening to the man who sleeps over more than I do explain why my feelings had gone too far. We'd been together for 2 years. He was always in the background, since high school, through college, and now. Family, like a brother. You're not jealous, right? I stayed quiet. Because I was mature. Because I trusted her. But maturity isn't armor, and trust isn't immunity. Eventually, I realized I wasn't being loved. I was being cast into a role, reliable, quiet, non-threatening. And they were just testing how well I could perform it. That night, I didn't apologize. I finally understood. I wasn't being forgiven. I was being replaced. I watched her place the 3rd plate like it belonged there. Not as an afterthought, not as a guest's, but as routine. Jay was already seated, leaning back like he owned the table. Like he'd been here before. Like he never left. The smell of garlic and white wine was thick in the air, clinging to the corners of the apartment we technically shared. She smiled too brightly, offering him the first scoop of pasta. His fork scraped the plate as he joked. Maybe you'll warm up one day, man. Emotionally, I mean. She laughed. Not a small, awkward laugh. The kind that rolls over you and signals. We've talked about this before. I blinked. Smiled back. Too slow, probably. Too stiff. I don't remember what I said. I remember the clink of my fork, the way the condensation ran down my glass like I'd been sweating through it. They kept talking like I hadn't been hit. Like I wasn't there. Jay's voice filled the room. Loud, casual, overfamiliar. He told her about a gym story. Someone who couldn't finish a rep and got stuck under the bar. She laughed again. Touched his arm. My silence stretched out until it felt awkward, but not for them. For me. He looked over and said, "You all right, man? You've been really quiet lately." That was the moment. The turn. The flip. She tilted her head. "Yeah, you've been a little distant." She said it slowly, like she'd practiced it. I was being evaluated. The thing is, I had been quiet lately. Not because I was cold. Not because I was passive-aggressive. Because I was watching. Noticing. Calculating how much space I was allowed to take up before it made someone else uncomfortable. That's what it was, really, discomfort. Not mine. Theirs. They needed me to be agreeable. Silent. Mature. The good guy. The guy who doesn't interrupt dinner with something ugly like truth. Jay took another bite. Looked at me like I was a cracked dish they were debating replacing. "You're not mad, are you?" he asked, faux concerned. The grin didn't leave his face. I laughed. Just once. Sharp and short. She placed her hand on my arm. "Let's just enjoy the meal, okay?" Like I was ruining it. Like I hadn't just been reduced to the emotional equivalent of background music. I finished my plate. Slowly. I didn't say much. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I realized I wasn't in that conversation anymore. I wasn't in this relationship, either. Not really. Not the way they were. Later that night, I asked her if she thought anything about dinner was off. She looked up from her phone, blinked like I'd interrupted a peaceful dream, and said, "What do you mean?" I mentioned the joke. Jay's jab about me being emotionally distant. How she laughed. How it felt rehearsed. Or maybe not rehearsed, just familiar. She paused for a beat, just long enough to make me question bringing it up at all. Then came the smile. The soft, patient smile reserved for toddlers and irrational men. "Babe, you're reading into things again." Again. That word landed like a slow push to the chest. Not aggressive. Just firm enough to move me back into place. You get tense when people joke. You always have. Jay doesn't mean anything by it. You know that. She said it like I was a well-known problem in a user manual. And for a moment, I believed her. Because this wasn't new. This cycle. I'd raise a concern, however gently. She'd minimize it. Offer me an explanation just polished enough to sound reasonable. Then she'd reframe it so the real issue wasn't what happened. It was how I felt about it. I was tense. I was sensitive. I took things too seriously. It wasn't about what was said. It was about how I heard it. My perception was the only thing out of place. She kissed my cheek and turned back to her screen. Case closed. I sat there for a while, trying to pinpoint when I stopped trusting my reactions. When I started filing my instincts under irrational. When I began using her emotional map to navigate my own feelings, even when it took me in circles. It wasn't just the dinner. It was the way she'd talk about him. The way he'd drop by unannounced. The toothbrush in the guest bathroom. the beer he left in our fridge, the playlist that was hers and his, not mine. I noticed these things. Quietly. Always quietly. Because every time I brought something up, I felt smaller by the end of it. I wasn't allowed to feel wronged, only dramatic. I wasn't allowed to feel confused, only insecure. Eventually, I stopped expecting validation. I started asking for clarity like a man asking for permission to speak. And somehow, even that was too much. So I nodded, let it go, told her she was probably right, that I just had a long day. I think I even apologized. She smiled and said, see, that's better. Better. As if I'd been malfunctioning, and now I was working again. The next day, I got a message from her friend, Carla. We weren't close, but she'd always played the neutral peacekeeper type, overly cheerful, vaguely therapeutic. She wrote, hey, I just wanted to say I totally get how you're feeling. I know it's been a little weird with Jay, but she's not doing anything wrong. They've just always had an easy bond. You probably just feel a little left out. I didn't reply right away, because that phrase, easy bond, stuck out like it had been copy-pasted from someone else's thoughts, from someone who wasn't supposed to be sharing them. Carla wasn't there at dinner. So how did she know anything had happened? How did she know what I said? What I felt? I stared at the message, reread it, and realized I wasn't having a private conversation anymore. I was part of a group discussion I hadn't been invited to. A debrief. Somewhere between dessert and dishes, my thoughts, the ones I'd carefully unspooled the night before, had been repackaged, passed around, and reinterpreted through the lens of how to manage me. I wasn't her partner. I was a case study, an anxious footnote in a narrative where she got to play the calm, reasonable one, and Jay, the misunderstood best friend just trying to coexist with the insecure boyfriend. And they were the ones helping me process it all. I scrolled up. Carla had written, just try not to take it personally. That's the phrase that always comes up when they're doing something personal and don't want you to treat it that way. I imagine the conversation. Her, explaining how I misread things sometimes. Maybe adding that I struggle with emotional expression. A kind, concerned tone, always so measured. She wouldn't sound cruel. She never did. That was the trick. Nothing ever sounded like betrayal. It just looked like it. They never spoke in accusations. Only suggestions. They never excluded me. They simply explained me to others in my absence. Jay used the same words later that week. We were folding laundry. He said, you know, man, I think you just feel a little left out sometimes. I get it. She and I, it's always been easy. Word for word. Like the script had already been written. And now he was reading his lines back to me. I smiled. Not because I agreed, but because I knew something now. They weren't confused about how I felt. They were just aligned on how to spin it. There was a weekend last fall when I had to fly out for a work event. She didn't come, said she wanted some time to herself, maybe binge a show, clean out the closets. I didn't think twice about it. I trusted her. When I came back, everything looked the same. The apartment smelled like lemon cleaner and cheap incense. The bed was made, the way she does it, tight at the corners, pillows arranged with clinical neatness. But something felt lived in. Not messy, just settled. She mentioned Jay had stopped by to help her move a few things. I remember the way she said it. Offhand, like he was the cable guy. It barely registered at the time. I was tired, and I had no reason not to believe her. But now, with everything else laid bare, that memory burned in a different color. It wasn't the fact that he was here. It was where he was. I looked back through my photos from that trip, trying to remember if I had said anything that sounded like suspicion. I hadn't. Not then. But I remembered a text from her saying, Jay just left. He helped move the bookshelves. I'm gonna crash early. I hadn't asked if he stayed late. If he stayed long. If he stayed over. I hadn't asked whose side of the bed he sat on to drink the tea. Or whose pillow his head rested on when they watched Netflix. Or whether the hoodie in the laundry, not mine, not hers, had his cologne on it for a reason. Because back then, I wasn't looking. That's how trust works, right? You don't check the footage. You don't sniff the sheets. You don't ask the kinds of questions that only cheaters expect. But hindsight sharpens everything into outlines you can't ignore. Like the way my side of the bed always sags a little differently, unless someone else has been sleeping there. Or the fact that one of my t-shirts was folded differently in the drawer, like it had been repacked, not just washed. Or that weird indentation in the couch cushion I hadn't sat on in days. These weren't signs. They weren't proof. They were echoes. And once you start hearing them, it doesn't matter if anything happened. What matters is what they were willing to risk, and what they assumed you'd never notice. Trust isn't something you lose all at once. It bleeds out, quiet, slow, unnoticed, until all that's left is doubt in a familiar shape. And suddenly, the home you shared with someone feels like a room you've broken into. She texted me in the middle of the day. Let's do dinner tonight. Just us. No distractions. I'll cook. You choose the wine. It sounded like a reset. Like maybe, she'd felt the tension too. Maybe she wanted to talk. Not argue. Not explain things away. Just acknowledge it. Us. I got home early. Picked up a bottle of red I knew she liked. Cleaned up. Shaved. That kind of hope. The kind that feels like maybe you're being seen again. It makes you foolish in quiet ways. The lights were dim. The table was set. Perfectly. Cloth napkins. Real plates. No takeout boxes or laptop on the counter this time. There were 3 chairs. At first, I thought maybe one was for serving dishes. Space. Then I heard the knock. Jay walked in like it was normal. Greeted her with that shoulder squeeze he did when he wanted to be subtle, but still marked territory. He nodded at me like we were co-workers at a forced retreat. She smiled. You said you didn't mind if he joined, right? I hadn't. Because I hadn't been asked. The pasta was already boiling. The wine glasses were already out. 3 of them. I wasn't invited. I was managed. Jay sat down before I did. She served him first. They were laughing about something from earlier in the day, something I obviously hadn't been part of. I watched them settle into the rhythm they always seemed to have when I wasn't looking. Too easy, too synced, too rehearsed to be accidental. Midway through the meal, she said, we just wanted to talk about what's been going on. Clear the air. That's when I knew this was never about reconnecting. It was an intervention. For me. Jay was the one who started. He said he hoped I was okay, but that, lately the energy had felt kind of off. That I'd been giving off vibes that were hard to be around. I waited for her to correct him, to say that wasn't fair, that I had a reason to be distant. She didn't. She said, we just thought it'd be healthier if you had space to say how you feel. Healthier? For who? I looked at them. 2 people who had clearly talked before this, maybe several times, maybe in this very room, about how to get me to bend without breaking. This wasn't a conversation. It was calibration. And I was the one being realigned. They didn't want honesty. They wanted compliance dressed up as communication. I said nothing for the rest of the meal. Not out of stubbornness. Out of clarity. Because I finally saw the script. And the only line left for me was silence. By the time dessert hit the table, store-bought tiramisu on ceramic plates to make it feel homemade, I knew where this was going. Jay took the lead again. Said he'd been sitting with some things lately. That he didn't want to overstep, but that he felt it would be dishonest not to say something. His voice had that careful tone, gentle enough to pass for concern, firm enough to carry authority. Like he'd been waiting for the right scene to deliver this monologue. He said, sometimes I feel like, the way you pull away when we're all together, it creates a weird tension. I didn't look at him. I looked at her. She nodded. Slowly. As if they were discussing weather patterns, not me. Like they were both meteorologists, calmly dissecting the storm in the room, while I sat there soaked and silent. She added, you don't always realize how your energy impacts people. There it was. My energy. Not my words. Not my behavior. Just a vague presence that apparently unsettled them. I was being treated like a faulty thermostat. And they were offering feedback. Out of care, of course. She said they just wanted me to feel safe to express myself. But the way she said it, I knew. Expression only counted if it didn't disrupt the mood. I wasn't being invited to share. I was being given an ultimatum disguised as a dialogue. Stay soft. Stay quiet. Stay predictable. Or be labeled the problem. Jay even said, no judgment, man. We're all doing our best. Which is the kind of sentence people say when they've already judged you and just want you to skip to the apology part. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I understood nothing I said here would be heard. It would be reinterpreted, reworded, filtered through their lens of what a stable boyfriend should sound like. And if I refused the framing, I'd be called hostile. If I questioned it, I'd be projecting. If I stayed quiet, well, that just confirmed I was shutting down emotionally. There was no move I could make that didn't tighten the noose they were weaving out of my restraint. So I chose stillness. Not passivity, stillness. Because silence, when it's deliberate, stops being surrender. It becomes observation. I watched them scrape their forks across porcelain. Smiling. Comfortable. United. I was no longer the partner. I was the case study. And this dinner? It wasn't a conversation. It was my evaluation. There was a moment, maybe halfway through the silence that followed his "we all want what's best for each other" line, where her hand casually reached out to refill his water glass. Not mine. His. The gesture was small, soft, effortless, but it snapped something in me louder than any scream could have. Her fingers brushed the side of his wrist as she set the glass down. Neither of them flinched. Neither looked at me. It wasn't a secret. It wasn't defiance. It was worse. It was normal to them. His cup sat between our plates, slightly angled toward her. Mine remained full, untouched. The symbolism wasn't poetic. It was surgical. I started noticing more things. How her napkin was folded the same way she did when we had company. Not for me, for us. How her legs were crossed toward him. How she laughed at his dumb little side comments. The same way she used to laugh at mine when she still wanted me to feel interesting. She didn't just look comfortable around him. She looked curated for him. And suddenly, I saw the entire scene for what it was. Not a dinner. Not a miscommunication. Not a misunderstanding. A handoff. Of emotional space. Of loyalty. Of place. Not with drama. Not with betrayal. Not with a kiss or a confession. But with stillness. She didn't have to say it. Because I could feel it in the distance between her chair and mine. In the way she no longer leaned in when I spoke, but reflexively turned toward him, like gravity itself had shifted. She was still calling me her boyfriend. But not one part of her moved like that was true. Everything she offered, her attention, her softness, her inner world, now curved toward someone else. And me? I was just present. A relic. A placeholder. A figure she hadn't erased yet, but had long since stopped coloring in. It's strange, the exact moment when heartbreak stops being an emotion and becomes a fact. Like math. Undeniable. Final. I didn't feel angry. Not even sad. What I felt was something colder, the click of understanding. The weightless, empty click of realizing the person you love already left, they just never packed a bag. After that dinner, something shifted. But not in them. In me. I stopped asking questions. Stopped checking the calendar when she said she was going out. Stopped noticing when his shoes were by the door, or when his jacket found its way to the coat rack again. She must have thought I was adjusting. She started smiling more when she spoke to me, offering little touches again, making plans for the weekend, as if silence meant compliance. Jay was around more, too, subtly. Not every day, but enough to stay present. A mug in the sink. A phone charger plugged in by the couch. Always a shadow, never a confrontation. They were so calm now, like something had been resolved. Because I had stopped resisting. To them, that meant I was doing better. In truth, I had simply decided to leave. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally. I was already gone. They had wanted me to become something smaller, more polite, more palatable. Someone who didn't flinch at the intimacy they shared or question the roles being quietly rearranged. So I gave it to them. I became agreeable, predictable, the silent, smiling version of myself they could coexist with. And as I faded into that shape, I watched how relieved they were. Jay would crack jokes again, bolder now, louder. She would smile across the room, more freely. The temperature had shifted, and they mistook it for healing. But it wasn't peace. It was distance. And in that distance, I gained something dangerous. Leverage. Not information. Not proof. Just clarity. Precision. When you stop needing someone to admit the truth, you start seeing it everywhere. Every pattern becomes obvious. Every gesture becomes data. And every silence becomes a choice. They thought they were winning because I stopped reacting. But the truth was, I'd stopped playing. They believed they had contained me. What they didn't know is that I was already cataloging the exit. One movement at a time. One smile at a time. One absence of care at a time. I wasn't angry. I was just done. Done performing the role they wrote for me. Done shrinking to fit a version of myself that kept them comfortable. Done pretending I was in a relationship that only needed me as a witness. They hadn't lost me when they crossed the line. They lost me when they treated my silence like submission and forgot it could be strategy. I waited until a night when the apartment was quiet, when her phone was charging in the kitchen and his laughter wasn't echoing from the living room. They were both asleep. I moved slowly, not sneaking, just deliberate. My backpack was already packed. Essentials only. No drama. No theatrics. Just clarity, zipped into compartments. I didn't leave a long letter. No accusations. No final argument. No "you broke me" confessional. Just a note. placed on my side of the bed. You wanted me to understand something. I do. Dinner was unnecessary. That was it. They wouldn't get the version of me who pleads or lashes out. They wouldn't get to frame this as abandonment or instability. They'd wake up to absence, quiet, sharp, and impossible to explain away in a group chat. I left the keys in the dish by the door, folded the blanket on the couch, took the charger that was mine, but left the one he used. Petty? Maybe. But I wanted her to see the division, to feel the audit. The moment you stop asking for space and start reclaiming it is the moment you stop bleeding. It wasn't a breakup. It was a reset. A final scene in a play I no longer wanted to be cast in. I didn't announce my exit, because they never announced the replacement. They just phased me out with shared glances and closed-door smiles. So I returned the favor, left without warning, without fight, without apology, because this wasn't a war. It was a quiet hostage exchange, and I finally chose to walk away from the role they'd written for me. The placeholder boyfriend, the emotionally complex project they could fix or ignore depending on their mood. I didn't lose her. She was already gone. I just stopped standing in the way of her being somewhere else. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I felt finished. The first message came before noon. You misunderstood everything. I stared at it for a full minute before muting the thread. No anger, no curiosity, just stillness. Later that day, he liked one of my story posts, something vague and impersonal. A photo of coffee and skyline. The kind of thing people use as bait for conversation. I didn't block them immediately. I wanted them to feel the silence first. Not the dramatic kind, not punishment, but that strange, unfamiliar quiet when someone who used to absorb everything suddenly echoes nothing back. It's disorienting. You say their name in a text and expect a shape to respond. But the shape's gone. I packed the last of my things that night from my friend's couch, the kind of belongings you forget you even had. The book she bought and never read. The mug with a chip we both ignored. A hoodie that didn't smell like me anymore. Everything felt borrowed, like I'd been squatting in my own life for the last 6 months. I thought there would be grief, maybe even rage, but there was only relief. Not because I was okay, but because I wasn't pretending to be anymore. They kept trying. Small reach-outs, friendly check-ins, not to reconnect, just to confirm I hadn't rewritten the story without their input. But I didn't answer, because I didn't need permission to leave the version of me they were comfortable with. I didn't need permission to want more than reasonable explanations for emotional trespass. And I didn't need permission to walk away from a dinner table where I was being served shame with a side of concern. So I didn't reply. I didn't explain. Because some people don't want clarity. They just want to stay close enough to control the narrative. And I'd rather be misunderstood in truth than understood in distortion. Now, sometimes I ask myself, if someone replaces you, but still wants you to stay, is that love or just convenience?